So
I'm the moderator.
I'm the moderator.
I'm the immoderator.
So having brought the Vidyadhara into the room in a visual way and having brought the fire into the room in a visualization way, I'd just like to say a few things before the panel begins. Some of you may know this is the fourth and the final panel in the series to celebrate the publication of the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma. The first panel was held at Naropa University in early April, on April 6th, and then just last weekend there was a panel at the Rubin Museum in New York and a panel at Harvard University on Tuesday night, and now we're having the final panel here. Some of the people here have been on a number of panels, and for some this is their first and only. I would like to just thank those who have our sponsors and supporters locally. I'd like to thank the Halifax Shambhala Center and also Shambhala Media for providing the media services. Overall, we'd like to thank Naropa University, who's providing a wonderful reception tonight, the Shambhala Sun Foundation, who's provided lots of support in many different ways, and Shambhala Publications, who published the book and have also provided quite a lot of support. I wanted to just pay homage to the three principles quickly, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, that go into the creation of a series of books like this. The Buddha principle obviously is represented by the Vidyadhara himself and by his lineage, both those who came before him and those who come after. The Dharma is represented, of course, by these books themselves. And then the Sangha principle, I think, is represented by all of us who took part in the seminaries and encouraged him to teach, and most specifically, those who are willing to present his teachings, and in this case, the panelists from these various panels. But I want to, in terms of the Sangha principle, mention one person in particular, and that is Acharya Emeritus Judith Leaf, who has devoted a lot of years and a lot of brain cells to working with this material. And because of her dedication and her devotion overall to the path of Dharma and her work as a teacher and as an editor, we have these fantastic books, and I think we really owe her a debt and a bow of thanks. So thank you. And finally, before turning it over to the moderator, I'd like to just mention that in addition to the regular edition, which is quite beautiful, there's also a deluxe edition of the Profound Treasury. And the proceeds from this are going to support the Chogyam Trungpa Legacy Project, which has gone into some debt to make this tour happen. And so we wanted also an acknowledgement of all of you, this being the homeland that the Vidyadhara established, and all of you as the core students, wanted to make this available to you if you're interested. It sounds like a sale, it is kind of. One night only, if you're interested in getting the deluxe edition for a donation of $300 or more to the Legacy Project, I will be taking orders, and in addition to getting the deluxe edition, you will also get a tax receipt for a portion of your gift. So thank you very much, and now I'll turn it over to our immoderate panel. Mr. Boyce.
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. And for those of you who are in the middle of a program on meditation, thanks for coming out to the panel discussion. Not known as the most thrilling thing to attend, a panel discussion, I know, but never has such an illustrious group as this been gathered. If I were to go through the bios of all these longtime students of the Vidyadhara and the Sakyong and other teachers, it would take up a fair amount of time. So I'm going to mainly let their credentials speak for themselves. We've obviously just heard about Acharya Emeritus Judy Leaf. We'll hear from her in a couple minutes talking about the whole purpose of the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma. Acharya Dale Asriel, longtime student of the Vidyadhara, the Sakyong. David Rome, who has had many titles and is now more or less titleless. And titlelessness is not a bad state. And Lopan Lodro Dorje, who needs no introduction, and our newest Acharya, Noel McClellan, who was a student of the Vidyadhara since birth, 39 years ago. So what we're here to do tonight in the form of this panel is I forgot to make that announcement. Along with the fire visualization, visualize that you have a phone and that it's turned off. Or at least on vibrate. So we're here to celebrate the publication of the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma. It's a significant milestone in the transplantation of Buddhism to the West. Many of you experienced these teachings in other forms, some of you live and in person at various times. This project, however, offers it to a wider audience, a newer audience, who will have many inspirations and insights and questions, and it will be available to them for many generations. So tonight our topic is meditation, and we're not going to be parsing the fine details and debating technique and that sort of thing. We're really celebrating and drawing out the quality of the Vidyadhara as a supreme meditation master. And one of the most notable qualities is that in speaking about meditation and instructing in meditation, he embodied and evoked the quality of meditation. So one felt and feels when you engage these texts that you are being invited into a realm where meditation is self-existing, and then the details come along, rather than here are some instructions for how to get something that you want. So, and he did that with some wonderful metaphors and phraseology like cool boredom and touch and go and all those sorts of things that could just emerge because he was reflecting genuine experience rather than following a playbook. And that legacy is being passed on. So that's really what we're here to celebrate tonight. So I'd like to start by asking Judy to talk about the origins of this project and its purposes and what it's been like, what's been involved in carrying it out. So, without further ado.
Can Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So I'd like to tell a little history story. Once upon a time, in around 1980, the Vidyadhara met with Samuel Burkholz, the head of Shambhala Publications. And he laid out for Sam some of the priorities of what he wanted published of his works, how he wanted the publishing to be approached. And he mentioned 3 specific things at that time, recognizing that, he would not always be around. And he said the first priority, he wanted to have a book published on Lojong, on mind training, with his mind training teachings. And so that became a priority at that period, and it resulted in the book Training the Mind and Cultivating Loving Kindness. The second thing he mentioned was 3 volumes based on his seminary teachings that he wanted to be compiled and edited for the benefit of many generations of practitioners and scholars going into the future beyond his lifetime and the lifetime of the people studying directly with him as his legacy. He talked about it being, a reference book for scholars and part of college library collections, etc. And the third thing he mentioned was a series of monographs, which would be more lightly edited series of books based on various seminars that he taught. And those provided some guidelines for the people who worked on editing his material and for his publishers. The series of monographs became known as the Dharma Ocean series, and that idea was he wanted to produce approximately 108 volumes of those, and we have many volumes still to go. And so in response to his desire or his command or wish to produce this material, there were many little attempts at working with the seminary teachings. Fortunately, some of the early ones didn't really go very far, but it began many years ago. Actually, Sarah Coleman and myself, I was an editor then still, we decided, this is before computer use, before, internet and MP3 files and all that kind of thing. So we started to put together the basis for what would become what we call the conscripts, combining the transcripts. So we had a big pile of seminary transcripts at the time, but it was not the complete set yet. He was still teaching seminaries. And we removed them from their bindings, and we had boxes, a bunch of boxes, and we had scissors. And so we tried to say, well, what are the things that we talked about, the first foundation of mindfulness, and put them in that box, or something. Once he talked about devotion, put it in that box, and we tried to, create the raw materials to start working on this project. And so we diddled around with that for a while, and it was very daunting. And then things took a turn, and I ended up going to Naropa, and the project languished for some time. And then a little bit later, there was another attempt at creating the first volume, and Jim and Ellen Green put a lot of work into that project, but it didn't kind of pan out exactly at that time either. And it's interesting because in either of those cases, the opus was not yet complete, really. So finally, at a later date, a number of the senior editors were sitting and talking to each other, and we looked around and noticed that we were all getting pretty old. And so there was kind of looking around, how are we going to do this if, it seemed to be really important for him. And basically, to be honest, we kind of avoided it. And so then, somehow or other, many conditions and causes came together to make it possible to actually do this work. Everything from the development of Shambhala, Vajradhara publication, Shambhala media, the development of technological support of the Mukpo family and Sport of Vajradhatu Publications and Shambhala Publications in a kind of collegial, kind of auspicious coming together of causes, conditions, made it possible to set a contract and have a deadline and begin this work. So somehow I ended up with this project. And fortunately for me, I had many, many people that helped me, and I'd like to acknowledge them. There were many donors who helped this project and supported it in so many different ways, everything from Shambhala Trust to many individuals. There were also the glorious translation committee, my boys, and we had endless correspondence and support from them on technical issues and terminology, and tremendous support from them. And then my assistant, Ellen Carney, who worked closely with me, particularly we worked very carefully to try to preserve the oral spoken quality of the work. So we read aloud. We didn't have a readathon yet, but we read aloud every single bit of it back and forth to test the quality of the spoken word. And of course, Carolyn Gimian, who's tremendous support and actually did some of the editing, particularly in the Vajrayana portion of the work. And so I'd like to thank all of those people. The Vajradhatu seminaries were really a presentation of a core opus of the Vidyadhara's teaching. And I was really lucky enough to go to several of those seminaries, and while I was in that process, it wasn't not clear to me exactly what he was doing as an overall picture. But when I started working on this material, it was really amazing. You could see that even every seminary had the same basic structure, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. We could see he was actually creating one unified teaching. It was so beautiful to see how he was building that in a way that was only possible when you could kind of stand back and work with it in a different level. And that's how it came about. I think it's pretty unique. I looked around a lot. I had to use a lot of references and consult a lot of scholars for support. And as far as I know, there's so many good books on basic meditation. There's so many good books on the Vajrayana and Mahayana teachings. But I don't know of any book that systematically goes through from beginning to end in the way that this selection of books does, and in a way that's totally directed towards people who are practitioners, but also very kind of strongly in wanting to know the fundamentals of the view and to put it into practice in their lives. So the view, a practice, and action. And I don't know of anything that systematically guides one along the path in a way that allows for repeated dipping in as one's level of understanding and subtlety develops. So it can be applicable to a beginning level, but it also raises questions and helps us raise questions about our own practice and about our own path, the kind of fertile questions that allow us to scrape away just layers and layers of superficial understanding to get to the core and the guts of what the path is all about. So it's a tremendous privilege to have been able to do my 7-year obsession retreat. And I hope that you all benefit from it, and that as a living practitioners and leaders in a group like this, that there's a sense of receiving fully and then paying it forward for the benefit of the suffering world, as it says in the video. The world needs help. We need help. We are the world. So we could jump into that together would be really great. Thank you.
Well, as the talk show host, Judy, I'd like to ask you just a few more questions here. I think one obvious question is, this is a huge organizational project. Can you give us some glimpse of how you were able to take teachings on the same topic from many different years and then bring them together? Just the sheer task of that.
Well, it's sort of like I was building like a building, and I was trying to find the building blocks. And so I had these big charts, and across the chart tops would be all the years of the 13 seminaries that he gave. 73, 74, 75. And then down on this way, I had, for every seminary, the title of the chapters. So there's a grid, and I had a big chart for Hinayana, a big chart for the Maya, big chart for the Vajrayana. And then I really tried to study kind of it's like the pattern. It's like music or something, the themes or chords or something. I tried to see the patterns in those. And then I color-coded everything. So, the red stuff might be all talking about Vipassana, or green might be talking about, I don't know, the Second Noble Truth or something like that. So I tried to see, because some topics he would talk about only once, and I'd say, hallelujah, glory be. But other topics he talked about in different years from different angles, and it wasn't just that, because every seminary had a certain flavor, and also it was a tremendous cultural difference from 1973 to 1985 and 86, like different realities in a way, the context within which these programs happened, and the kind of the milieu, of the times. So I tried to figure out, if he touched on the same topic from many, many ways, then I tried to figure out how to put it together. And then the other thing that I did is there was also a lot of material that came up in the questions and answers. And when that was enriching of the thread of a topic, I would try to incorporate that into the body of the text. So that's what I did.
Amazing. Well, maybe that's your next book, The Making of the Profound. It's like Apocalypse Now, right?
I still have all the charts. I rolled them up in the little scrolls now.
Just two more questions. One is about some of the source material. Some people who are new to this material may not know that the Vidyadhara had note cards for these talks, and you talked about working with the translators. So can you say a little bit about the nature of those note cards, and did they figure in this process?
To some degree they did, but they weren't all translated during the process of working with this. But from time to time I'd ask for a specific note card to be translated. They are in the process of translating all the note cards for the seminary talks, and those will be included on a parallel project coming out through Shambhala Media, which is e-books of the original transcripts. And that e-book form they'll be slightly cleaned up, but basically the raw transcripts will have as supplementary material all the note cards, which will be a great resource. Another really great resource that came up that was very important in working on this was the Treasury of Knowledge by Jamgon Kongtrul, which, all those volumes have been were being translated as this was going on, and they're incredible resources. Some of his talks sounded so contemporary and fresh, and it go back to this incredible Rime non-sectarian resource that's beloved by all Tibetan teachers, and you'd see that he was basically riffing and commenting on this classic text, or kind of taking a text that's very compressed, outline form, essence of teachings, and expanding it and so you could understand it. So he did a lot of things you just see directly parallel with the Treasury of Knowledge. And then other parts of seminary teachings were very closely, he was closely working with Gampopa and the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. And so there were classic texts, and Derek Collini, who was also very helpful in this whole project, was very well read in Tibetan works, and he also was very helpful in identifying sources that could be helpful and that had parallels with what the Vidyadhara was teaching to us.
Yeah, those note cards are incredible. They're kind of like footprints leading us back to the lineage sources of the seminary and therefore of these texts. So before we go to phase 2 of the panel, where I'm going to ask each of the other panelists to comment a bit on something from the Profound Treasury, I want to ask you one more question. So the Vidyadhara we had an injunction not to edit the teachings. And you've... So now we're done. This is all a sham. So you've spent your career editing the teachings.
Thanks for pointing this out. It's very kind of you.
So how do you square that circle? And well, not seriously, but semi-seriously. What was the Vidyadhara's view of that kind of editing of the teachings? And, how do you work with that kind of responsibility and challenge of preserving yet extending the teachings?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the most controversial, of course, is the Vajrayana, where many of you have gone to seminaries in your path at one point or another, and recollect saying, don't show this to anyone, this is a totally secret, or a self-secret, or secret, and you can talk about other things, but you can't talk about this. We were like beaten up about that, and so it was like, oh my God. But he wanted to do it, So, and I think it's also, again, it's a difference in timing. If you, when he started teaching and what was available in the general domain and what is available now, and just pretty much anything about the Vajrayana is available in books and online, etc. And he also had guidelines for how he wanted this done, which is helpful. And I kept thinking, self-secret. That's going to work. And one thing is he wanted it edited, and he wanted to edit it in a certain way. And at the same time, it is all teachings pre-transmission. And I think that made a big difference. The transmissions tended to be done at the end of seminary or later, where people would become Nundro, etc., like that. So, for whatever reason, he had wanted all of it to extend out. I think he never had a totally view that it's only for this little group, only for these people, that somehow it would be leaking out into the broader world. But if it was done, it should be done properly edited, properly structured, and following some of his editorial guidelines, which is, in a nutshell, he said to value clarity over voice, and to remove unnecessary material and clarify vague references and make decisions. And you realize that when you edit anything, as Carolyn knows, who also is going down with me,
you'll have a special section in Vajra Hell.
that editing it's a series of decisions, and you're making decisions all the way, little ones, that are just like style or basic English decisions, all the way to decisions trying to interpret what he was getting at. And so that's very daunting. I first started editing, the Vidyadhara was alive and could ask him. But in this case, I just tried to ask as many people as I thought might be helpful, and hope for the best, that it wouldn't be too distorted or lead people astray as they read these books, and it'd be all my fault because I went left instead of right on a decision. So since there's so many little decisions, I hope that the odds are that some of them are okay, and that will make up for the ones that I messed up. So.
Well, thank you very much. And now I think as we hear some excerpts from the Profound Treasury, I think we'll see how much clarity does come through. So I've asked each of the other panelists to choose a section to read from and say something about. So we'll start with Age Before Beauty. Youth in this case.
Thank you. So you talked, Barry, in the beginning about this quality in the teachings of the Vidyadhara of how he points to experience and points to the experiential dynamic and energy of meditation, and then how the sort of technicalities or even the techniques almost come along as an adornment to that. And the short section that I chose to look at and talk about a little bit definitely has that feeling. And it's in the chapter which is called Following the Example of the Buddha. And it's called The Three Aspects of Sitting Meditation. And the three aspects are posture, technique, and joy. And one of the things I also liked about this was it's felt memorable to me. I was like, okay, I can probably remember these three things. And the first one, I'll read the second one because it would be silly for me to describe it when it's so beautiful. But in brief, the first one is posture. And the Vidyadhara talks about human posture, or taking the posture of a human being. And he contrasts that to adopting the what he called the tudro, or the sort of bent over animal posture. And there's so much strength and quality of dignity just in this description of posture, this uprightness. And he says it's not like an ape or a banana, but just being human. And I think I can manage it, thanks. The second part is technique. And I'll just read this section. The second aspect of sitting practice is technique. Basically speaking, the technique is to be spacious and not wait for anything. If something is about to happen, it will happen. If it is not going to happen, it won't. Don't expect anything from your practice. Sitting practice is not a punishment or a reward. Don't expect it will bring you sudden bliss or a new relationship with reality. You have to sever yourself completely from any such view. Nobody is going to help you. You are on your own, John Doe or Jane Doe. Be alone, be lonely. Loneliness has the quality of somebody playing a bamboo flute. It has the quality of somebody strumming a guitar at the foot of a waterfall. Occasionally you sneeze, which might shock you. Loneliness will make you resentful and horny. Loneliness will make you cry and laugh at the same time. So that's technique. Interesting. And the third aspect is joy, and he points out that this is not surprise, not joy in the usual sense. And actually one of the qualities that I do notice in these teachings is this almost recurring, almost a wet blanket that gets thrown over your expectation. This kind of desire for a promise or some kind of, good feeling that you're going to get. And he kind of continuously punctures and brings you down from that. But the quality of joy he describes as being like medicine, which is bittersweet, and it's hard work, but there's this quality that it's good and it's wholesome. And furthermore, it's like this sense of your life with a sense of totality, so inclusive of your pain and your pleasure, and all coming into your immediate experience. So I found those to be a powerful foundation in one's approach to meditation.
Thank you very much. And some people think the Hinayana is boring. That's why Dale's going to talk about cool boredom in a minute. But first, Lodra would like to talk about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. At least he said that at dinner. Who knows what he's going to do now? He marches to his own drummer. But in any case, we do know that the Vidyadhara's presentation of the 4 foundations of mindfulness was not, as they say, the canonical approach. It was unique and evocative. So whether you talk about that, Lodra? Yeah.
Thank you, moderator. One of the unique things, or I think about the Vidyadhara was, I think as we experienced, is that he was continually somehow in communication with and tuned into his audience because he had the higher perception. I think that our minds were transparent to him. And I think that's why each seminary has this sort of very unique flavor. As Judy described, I remember myself looking through some transcripts in the early 90s thinking, holy moly, how is this conscripts thing even possible? Because each seminary has its particular tone. But I think those tones are influenced by this kind of living encounter that he was constantly manifesting with his audience. And as Judy says in her introduction, each of these teachings was given at a particular time to a particular audience that had a particular cultural understanding. So I think one of the profound things about this profound treasury is that the Vidyadhara found a way of making a bridge between our 20th century or 21st century American, European karma, psychological understanding, political confusion, and making a bridge between that and the basic Dharma, not to mention the Vajrayana Dharma. We were talking at dinner a little bit about Barry's work and Jim's work with the Mindful magazine and all of the different venues in which mindfulness is being presented, and which is part of the general infiltration in our culture of meditation, in law, in emotional intelligence, in training Marines, in resiliency, all these things. And the question of, you were talking about the question of what language you can use, and that within the Dharmic context that we're experiencing, we can use all kinds of terms like nounness or non-thought or something like that. Those words have a resonance to us as a practicing community, but if you use those words outside of the context of our experience, people don't know what you're talking about. So there's a whole language that develops in the context of the interaction between a teacher and a practicing community, or people who are steeped in a dharmic environment. And on the other hand, when you go outside of that particular community, people may not be able to understand your language. So all I'm getting at is Vidyadhara was a master of creating that linguistic and cultural bridge. So there are all kinds of books these days on Vajrayana teachings, Dzogchen teachings, or Mahamudra teachings, but Vidyadhara is a master of saying, well, what is it all about? If you're meditating, what is it all about? If you're going to do the Hinayana practice of mindfulness, what is it all about? And then he would point out particular things, like in the thing that Noel just read about what was it? Loneliness makes you angry and horny, or whatever it is. So Rinpoche is just talking about mindfulness, but then he's talking about shunyata experience, and then he's talking about heightened experience that you can transmute. Right? So if you're going to do a Mahamudra practice or something like that, the word sounds good. There's a lot of advertisement about it, or Dzogchen is very popular. But what the fuck is it? And how could you even approach it? So these books, these create a platform that people can gradually be brought into the understanding. So in terms of the foundations of mindfulness, Barry had suggested earlier, I said, what is this panel about? And Barry said he was going to ask about the foundations of mindfulness presentation, which is a little different from some of the others. If you're like me, I know a lot of you are meditation teachers. I think it's very useful to read, well, how does Mahasi Sayadaw present meditation? How does Jack Kornfield present meditation? How does Joseph Goldstein present meditation? How do the Zen people present meditation? How do the mindfulness people presentation? How do we do it? How did we do it traditionally? How is the Sakyong asking to look in Shambhala meditation? It's useful to look at that. And then it's very interesting to look back at the way Rinpoche presented the four foundations of mindfulness as a kind of mirror of all those things. I was looking at that last night, and I was struck by how austere it was. It's like, touch your experience, let it go. Touch your experience, let it go. Touch your experience, let it go. Whatever it is, don't block it. Whatever it is, don't entertain it. There's no room for entertainment. There's no room for fantasy. There's well-being, but there's no extra stuff. So I was kind of inspired by it, and also kind of puzzled by it, because I know that there's this whole very profound tantric background that he's coming from in presenting this, but at the same time it seemed so plain and so austere. But then I thought, oh, okay, he's creating the possibility of a mirror. He's creating the possibility of a mirror. So anyhow, partly what I'm getting at, or my feeling is about these books, is you really have to tune into the atmosphere. Obviously Judy had to do this in terms of, the symphony of what these things are. But there's not only the conceptual content, but there's the atmospherics of what is he doing? What is he doing? What is he doing when he presents it this way? He says an interesting thing in the Prajna talk. This is from the 79 seminary. I'm sure it's in here somewhere. He says, there's a difference between skillful and unskillful presentation of Dharma. In an unskillful presentation, the teacher will say, it's snowing outside, and you look outside, it's actually raining. It's not snowing. So the presentation of the Dharma and the experience of the students is not synchronized. So he says when you're presenting Dharma, the experience that people are having, the practice you're doing with people, and the teaching you're giving should all be one body, speech, and mind synchronized affair. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It's not effective. It doesn't communicate. It doesn't awaken the prajna properly. So this is very characteristic of all of his teaching, I think. In the Foundations of Mindfulness, the things he chose to emphasize, he did talk about mindfulness of life, which is very related to the feeling movement, I think, in the Shambhala meditation approach. And in the third foundation, mindfulness of effort, he chose to focus on what we know as the sudden jerk or the sudden glimpse. Because what was very characteristic of his teaching, particularly in the early years, was this notion that the ego is a process, not a thing. And the ego is a process of continually reconstructing itself, and we continually reconstruct our habitual patterns and continually recreate our defense mechanisms. And he says, well, these defense mechanisms and this sense of identity is actually not solidly secured at all. It is full of holes. So the early meditation instruction seems particularly designed to remove the padding of discursive thought, and remove his whole thing about no entertainment. It's all about removing the things that we generate to give us a sense of continuity. Removing the kind of discursive subconscious gossip that contributes to the sense of continuity. So there's momentariness, and then that momentariness that's full of gaps, and out of that he introduced the sudden glimpse instruction, which he says goes from the Hinayana all the way up to the Tantra. So I think particularly the Vajrayana teachers, when they talk about the third foundation of mindfulness or looking at the momentary mind, they'll leverage the momentary mind into the glimpse of the ordinary mind transmission. That's part of what I think why he did the four foundations of mindfulness in the particular way he did. Just to talk a little bit more about atmospherics, many of you probably remember that in the early days in particular, he said the Vajrayana transcripts, you should regard them as a secret, even though in some ways they're not completely explicit. For instance, the Vajrayana, these talks were given at the seminary. People hadn't done Nundra yet. So, you read those talks, you get a general feeling, you get a lot of general feeling of the Tantra, and actually this is characteristic of a lot of the books of the Vidyadhara we read in the early days, the life of Naropa, the Mandala seminars, all these things. He did a lot of things which create a basic tantric ground, and he talked about a lot of things like the 5 Buddha families that usually you don't hear about. Usually you wouldn't hear about the 5 Buddha families until after you had received the Vajrayana empowerments. Usually that happens later, but he presented that as a ground. So generally, he just poured out the kind of groundwork understanding so that we would have a context. And some years ago, we would do, during the seminaries, in the beginning of the Vajrayana period, we would do a long, which would consist of reading the Vajrayana transcript environment, Vajrayana transcripts of one particular year, and that created kind of very powerful and magical environment. So I guess all I'm just trying to say here over and over again is, I think the way to regard this kind of a book is as an oral transmission. It has an oral transmission quality. And I think that's why Carolyn wanted to do the readathon.
The resounding.
The resounding. It's or even what Noel just read about, loneliness, be lonely, right? That's a statement of egolessness, statement of shunyata, statement of dharmakaya. You're by yourself, no one will help you. In another context, he said, well, you should intensely supplicate the lineage. But in this context, he says, no one will help you, you're alone. It's a Dharmakaya statement. It's a pointing out instruction. Just another flip side of that. Back in the early 80s, we were visited by a Tibetan teacher from Europe, whom Rinpoche had some skepticism. He thought, well, this man is somewhat genuine teacher, but somewhat an imitator. And he wanted to know if he could have a copy of the transcripts. And he did his best Padma family magnetizing energy turned on us to say, oh, can I have this transcript? And I kind of resented the way he was putting out his energy, but I brought it to Rinpoche anyway. And hey, so-and-so has requested this transcript. And Rinpoche said, well, okay, but you should inscribe on the transcript the following thing. So this is about the secrecy of these teachings. He said, so he had someone inscribe on the front page of the transcript, anyone reading these teachings without proper pointing out instruction and guidance, then the Dharmapalas will punish them, their suffering and confusion will increase. So that was his kind of warning that, if you're going to copycat my teachings, you better know what you're doing.
Thank you. So one of the themes that Lodra was touching on there is about how the most basic teachings were, and you see this in these works, Vajrayana infused, just in the quality of that presentation. And I think an example of that is Cool Boredom, which is something that you're going to read a section on and say something about, Dale.
I'm going to start by reading the section. This is Cool Boredom, and it's from the chapter called Breathing Out. Mindfulness of breathing is a way of creating obstacles to subconscious dreams and mental activities. The technique of mindfulness of breathing should provide obstacles. It is a nuisance that you have to keep hassling back to the breath. However, unless you are able to do that efficiently, you will not get properly bored. And if you do not get properly bored, you will not be in tune with the power of the practice. Everything may be happening very smoothly on the surface level, but you are not in tune with the magic of meditation practice or the spiritual energy of the lineage. Boredom is important because boredom is anti-credential, anti-entertainment. And as we develop greater psychological sophistication, we begin to appreciate such boredom. It becomes cool and refreshing, like a mountain river. That very real and genuine boredom, or cool boredom, plays an extremely important role. In fact, we could quite simply say that the barometer of our accomplishment in meditation practice is how much boredom we create for ourselves. Cool boredom is rather light boredom. It has its uneasy quality, but at the same time, it is not a big deal. Cool boredom is simply another expression of the experience of well-being. Cool boredom is like what mountains experience. With cool boredom, thought processes become less entertaining. They become transparent. Cool boredom is hopelessness at its most absolute level. So one of the things that I'm struck by in this writing about cool boredom, of course, first is just the mastery of language, the power and the simplicity at the same time, and the way that the Vidyadhara can move from something that just gets you right in the guts, like it's a nuisance that you have to keep hassling back to the breath. I think, especially for meditators, when I began to study with the Vidyadhara in 1973, the first thing he said is, if you want to study with me, you have to sit 2 hours a day. And that was really boring, as we know. Many of us had that same prescription. And then the Datun, which was a month. And you pretty much just sit there. And then finally somebody's saying it is such a nuisance that you have to keep hassling back to the breath. Finally he said it out loud. It's such a relief, because we're all sitting there thinking that, but trying to somehow rise above it. So on one hand, it's very direct, just kind of like a punch. And people who have meditated know what that experience is. And then through his use of words and his ability to keep peeling away layers of concept, so you cannot get comfortable with his teaching, which is part of the point of it. Unless you are able to do that efficiently, keep hassling back to the breath. Efficiently. What does he mean? Unless you are able to do that efficiently, you will not get properly bored. Most people don't want to be properly bored. For many people, boredom is one of the feelings we do the most to avoid. It's in our culture, and I find it in myself. We can always think about something if there's nothing else happening. So properly bored, what is he talking about? If you do not get properly bored, you will not be in tune with the power of the practice. So here's something the mind cannot grasp. I find you cannot get your mind around this. Because first, we don't want to be bored, but we're hearing about being properly bored by meditating efficiently. I suppose it sounds kind of logical, except the experience is not. And yet, if we don't have this experience, if we don't follow this approach to practice, we will not be in tune with the power of the practice. Or as it says in the next sentence, we will not be in tune with the magic of meditation practice, which sounds even better, or the spiritual energy of the lineage, which might sound even better. So I find that his way of talking, it starts, and then he'll come at it this way, and just when you start to get the feeling that you know what he's talking about, he comes in this way and this way. So the language and I think that not just the atmosphere, but the feelings inside that it evokes, especially when it's read out loud, becomes a kind of dance with the teachings. We can't stay reserved and distant from a teaching like this. It's too close. and especially for meditators, because we have our experience of what he called hot boredom, which is restless and claustrophobia, and we'll do anything it's like we're crawling out of our skin and we wish we could, because it's so uncomfortable. So this is different. He presents it in a way that makes it seem like maybe we want this. The magic of practice. Isn't that what we wanted? But that's only the first paragraph. Boredom is important because boredom is anti-credential. So what's a credential? Like a title. Something we use to build ourselves up so we don't have to feel this quality that Lodro was talking about, that the whole thing is full of holes anyway. We use a credential to kind of bolster ourselves and make ourselves feel more intact. Anti-entertainment. That kind of hits where we live, for those who like to think. So again, he's cutting something down. But then he builds it up. As we develop greater psychological sophistication, we begin to appreciate such boredom. So appreciation is a different kind of mind. We're not fighting pleasure against pain anymore with appreciation. It's a bigger mind. It's a more sophisticated mind. We can appreciate the subtleties, the many different flavors and aspects going on all at once. And then an image comes. It becomes cool and refreshing like a mountain river. So that could be a quality of relief, that on one hand it's such simple language, so evocative. We know what that's like on a hot day to put our feet in a cool stream. That very real and genuine boredom plays an extremely important role. In fact, we could quite simply say that the barometer of our accomplishment in meditation practice is how bored we get. So I think, again, that somewhat, for a meditator, flips it on its head. Especially people sitting for a month or an hour. And you know you're going to have to just do the same thing again later in the day, another hour. There's nothing to look forward to, which is part of the point of this. But rather than that just being something that you have to grit your teeth and get through, instead he's saying, this is the point. This is how you can tell what's happening in your meditation. It's how bored you are. Then he describes it's light. It's a little uneasy. It's not a big deal. Then he says it's another expression of well-being. So again, the logical mind can't land anywhere. This keeps coming back to experience and then shaving away another layer, showing another facet. Well-being. Meditators, I think, who've gotten properly bored, when there's just nothing else you can do to entertain yourself. Most of us know this experience. And you finally have to settle because you just can't keep fighting. You get so tired. There is that experience of deepening, of well-being. It's a very tangible experience. And the image, this is what mountains experience. So, again, much more elemental, more vast, more poetic. We could hang on to that. That sounds good, doesn't it? We could be as settled as a mountain. Thought processes become transparent. That could be a relief. And then the punchline. Cool boredom is hopelessness at its most absolute level. So this is full cycle in a way. And so much of the Vidyadhara's early teaching on meditation was about hopelessness. You cannot hope for an escape from yourself at its most absolute level. Is that good or is that bad? So I think this is a very simple, very accessible to meditators teaching, and at the same time very profound. It actually takes us beyond our dualistic mind. So I think I will end there.
Thank you. So, no, David, no. We need everybody's waiting to hear from you. Plus, I've just gotten a free ticket here. I mean, normally the job would be to keep people from getting bored, but now we know that's a good thing, right? So, if you're bored, this is working, right? Are you bored? If you're bored, we're doing a great job here. So we have one more person to hear from, and David's going to move on to Vipassana, and then we'll have a few questions.
All right, if you weren't bored already. A lot of the kind of commentary I was thinking of making has already been said, so I don't think it needs to be said again. This is the beginning of the Vipassana section, and so all of us really have, for the most part, stayed just within the first volume, which is the Hinayana volume. And there are many chapters on shamatha and then many chapters on Vipassana. So you're just getting a tidbit. But this is the point in which he's transitioning from shamatha to Vipassana. And that's a very interesting point. And one of the things that happens here is that he's very specific about differentiating the experience of the two practices, even though he also will say again and again, basically you're doing the same thing. And so it's, as in Dale's presentation, there's this tension between, well, is it the same or is it different? And in these passages, I think he's stressing some of the differences, both from a technical or even from a scholarly perspective and experiential. And for Trungpa Rinpoche, mindfulness generally referred to shamatha practice, which is the practice of slowing down and tranquility. And then when he talked about Vipassana, he talked about awareness. And that's what comes out. And I think this is very important, not because that's the only way of understanding the teachings, but because, as Barry was saying at our dinner, mindfulness means so many things now. It covers a multitude of sins these days. And that's all right. That's all right. It's become a headline or a buzzword, and that's all right. But here in the real teachings, you get much more definition and specificity.
You didn't mean real.
Sorry?
I was kidding. I said you said the real teachings, or at least, well, in the genuine Dharma of the Vidyadhara here, in any case.
Thank you. And he begins by, this is the very beginning of the Vipassana section, and he actually begins by differentiating it even within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, let alone all the other Buddhist traditions, let alone all the other ways in which it's talked about. So he starts by saying Vipassana refers to the sense of precision that could arise from the sitting practice of meditation and slowly infiltrate our everyday life. There are two different schools of Vipassana: the analytical contemplative way and the non-analytical experiential way. The analytical school talks about the possibility of becoming more aware if you ask more questions and examine the nature of reality and your own state of mind. In our tradition, in accordance with Jamgon Kongtrul, who was the great teacher whose text he was drawing from frequently, in our tradition we talk mainly in terms of the non-analytical or experiential approach. Because of that emphasis, the Kagyu tradition is known as the practice lineage. So he makes that first distinction. And he's not putting the other one down. He actually talks about it a bit more later on. But the main emphasis, he's saying, in our tradition is on the non-analytical, the experiential. And then you have like insight meditation, which is vipassana, and that's a whole different take on vipassana. I mean, there are connections, and they all have some common root in the tradition. And then he makes the distinction between Vipassana and Shamatha. Vipassana is entirely different from Shamatha. Shamatha practice could be regarded as a way of quieting and pacifying the mind. It is a paring down process that leaves us very little reference point and very little to work on except the technique itself. Shamatha is a way to quiet oneself. It is the development of peace, which is the traditional definition of shamatha. Having already become quiet, having practiced and achieved that basic ground of shamatha, we could expand out and extend ourselves. With vipassana, rather than cutting down our mental perceptions, we sharpen our awareness. So he's setting up a contrast. And then I'm going to skip ahead to a section called Vipassana Technique. So Noel had a section on technique. Here's another one. The technique or means of developing Vipassana practice is exactly the same as in the third foundation of mindfulness, which we heard about from Lodro. Mindfulness of effort. It is sudden effort, a sudden glimpse of awareness that brings us back to the practice. The basic technique is to see the shadow or echo of the awareness and then disown it. When a sudden glimpse of awareness comes to you, you be with it. But at the same time, you disown it. That same approach is used for all practices. We should not hang on to any meditative technique or trick we might use. Rather, we should take advantage of it and then throw it away. However, although you throw it away, you never lose it. It comes back to you. That's the biggest trick about it. So, okay. In Vipassana, there is a new attitude toward that sudden abstract flash. In Shamatha, you have a flash, and then you faithfully go back to Shamatha practice. In Vipassana, when you have that sense of shadow or echo, you do not quite go all the way back, but halfway. You are making use of that flash, not trying to go right back. You don't come back completely to being absolutely one with the breathing, and, listen carefully, and you don't bring yourself back. However, you do come back. You are approaching it from the outer realm rather than the inner realm. Although as far as the flash itself is concerned, there is no difference. You are approaching it from the outer realm rather than the inner realm. Although as far as the flash itself is concerned, there is no difference.
Amen, brother.
I'm going to skip over one section and go to the last one, which ends with one of these wonderful images that the Vidyadhara just seemed to pull out of the air. And it's almost every page of this has one or two or more of these, where suddenly it's just comes right out of contemporary life and becomes completely experiential. So, after a lot of discussion, he says, it could be very difficult to understand exactly what we are getting into with Vipassana. But if a person has a really good understanding of shamatha practice and its own sense of space, the Vipassana practice becomes much easier to work with. In some sense, the difference between the two meditation practices is that in spite of its vision, its feeling, its inspiration, and its discipline, shamatha is very literal, whereas Vipassana is more romantic or idealistic. In Vipassana, there is room for ventilation or fresh air. Quite possibly a person at the early stage of Vipassana practice who is used to shamatha practice might feel extremely guilty for doing something unkosher. But that is just a form of hesitation. It is like not wanting to undress at a public swimming pool. Although there are swimming suits available, and you can put one on, it is still regarded as a big deal.
I take it that was your punchline, Mr. Rowe. Thank you. If anyone would like to ask a question or in some other way engage the panelists, here's your opportunity. We have a microphone here that could be passed around.
No, actually.
They just stand up. They have to stand up.
Oh, they have to.
They need to come up.
Yes. So, like getting undressed at the public swimming pool, you'll have to come up here and stand in front of the video camera. Well, who needs questions anyway? Oh, we have a question. So, while asking the panelists, also, yeah, there you go.
Thanks for being here. I have a very pragmatic kind of question, which is, I understand it's Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, but how else are they portioned? What are the chapters? I just heard one of the chapters is called the breathing out or the out breath. You were talking about combining topics from different, so I'm assuming it's not like this year and then that year and then that year. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
They're not arranged chronologically at all. It's all topically. So that means there'd be materials from, say there's a section on breath, for instance. He might have said something about breath in 1973 and 1979 and 1981, and they would be integrated into one single discussion about breath, like that. Which doesn't mean that topics don't recur, in different points in the discussion. In fact, the topic of mindfulness and awareness recurs over and over throughout because it's such an emphasis. He keeps coming back. It's like if there's like the bass note or something, the beat of the symphony, it always comes back. It goes this way, it goes that way, up and down, and it comes back, sit, meditate, mindfulness, awareness. And that's through all 3 volumes. Yeah.
And what are some other, do you go by body parts or top to bottom or inside out? Give me some examples. I guess so. I've got to go by the book.
Yeah. Do you want to?
He covered a certain number of topics, and some of them just are go in a certain order because the first noble truth goes before the second and the third, and that follows along. And other topics, he touched on in all sorts of ways, and I tried to integrate that into the flow of the discussion altogether. But in each of the volumes, if you're really interested in that, in the back there are sources. Where did the material from a chapter come from? Sometimes it comes from one or two talks. Sometimes it comes from a whole series of talks, little bits from a whole series of talks.
Yeah, I think I have to get the book.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a reception in a minute. We could have another question and then... Oh, we have two questions? Go ahead. Whoever's next, please. Diana?
Hi. Thanks for everything. Was anything but boring. Sort of a compound question, but in talking about boredom, as uncredentialed, or however, not paraphrasing that, talking then about the barometer and how the measure of the height of the barometer, and I felt like that was a positive thing, or a goal, to me sounds a little bit like that is a way of holding on to a credential.
So is it contradictory?
Yeah. But also, I'll ask it after that answer, but then I had a sort of way that I reconciled it.
Go ahead. Do you want to say more?
Well, sure. Then what occurred to me as a possible way to use that for myself would be to say maybe it's less of, a pin or just to pin it on, than allowing ourselves to be kind. That, it's okay to be bored because everyone else is feeling that, and so thus you're not failing at the practice. So that's kind of how I tried to reconcile it, and I wanted to hear your commentary on that. Or
one of the things I so appreciate about that excerpt and the way the Vidyadhara evoked experience, as you said, anti-credential, it's not about puffing ourselves up, but then the barometer, that's how we measure, right? If we're the barometer is showing we're doing a good job in our meditation. So couldn't that be a credential? I think that his writing so mirrors the experience of the meditator, where one moment we just cannot stand what we're feeling and experiencing, and we think we could not be doing, this cannot be right. And we just feel so disconnected and sometimes at war with ourselves and our experience, and so much struggle to find the way to do it right. And then there can be a moment where that wears out and we're just settling, and we're not even interested really in judging, because there's that kind of appreciation and spaciousness. But then we can't just hang on to that, because experience in our being is constantly changing and evolving, and meditation is something that we can't grasp onto, much as we might like to grasp onto the comfortable experiences. It keeps revealing its deeper truth to us. And I think that's one of the things that the Vidyadhara was referring to in that section about without boredom, we can't tune into the power and the magic and the spiritual energy of the lineage. So some kind of very profound truth beyond any of our manipulation could come through. But in our meditation experience, it isn't just like a nice straight line. Of course, we go through our range of experiences, and then if we sit enough, as he said, efficiently, we find that there is no way out, which I think is the hopelessness at the absolute level, that there actually is no escape from this, just this. So that's where we have the chance, as he keeps evoking the experience. Can't get your mind around it and just latch on, put it in your pocket and take it home. It's a path, and it continues to emerge. And our meditation mirrors us as the meditator. It's a kind of a dance and a settling, and then at a certain point there isn't really any more ambition to, as you said, be credentialed or measure. So it's an introduction of space, of a kind of non-dual space, but it's so different than a philosophical talk about the theory of space. He actually helps us connect with such an ordinary experience of sitting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Michael? So I think this will be the last question. I know we didn't have many, but we started very late for various reasons.
Judith, you edited a book, I believe, from seminary transcripts, a wonderful book called The Truth of Suffering and the Path of Liberation from the seminary transcripts, right? I'm just wondering what's the relationship between that book and this one, please.
That's easy. When I started working on this project, I knew it would take a really long time, and I couldn't stand the thought of working, and people keep asking, what are you doing, and never having anything to show for it. So I said, let's make a deal. Let's make a small book come out somewhere in the middle, so at least I can say I did something. So that's what happened. And in fact, that book, The Truth of Suffering, Path to Liberation, is really kind of like a section of the larger first volume. There's minor changes, but basically it's the section on the Four Noble Truths, which is part of the whole Hinayana teaching there. Yeah. And, we had talked, and it may come to pass in the future as well, we had talked about, these books are kind of big, right? And we had talked about possibly having other topical volumes that might draw on portions of this, because it makes it accessible and kind of a focus thing. There might be other topics who would do similar things to that kind of book, but we haven't yet. Yeah. Thanks.
And I think everyone should buy the deluxe edition of the book. That's the premier edition to buy. But also to go along with it, I recommend getting the digital version, which I also have, which you can search on. So it's an incredible tool, particularly for teachers.
So those 3 volumes are also available that way?
Yes, they're all on this iPad right now. Really? You can search on anything. Yeah, just started a few weeks ago, I think, or last week maybe. Yeah, I just bought them today.
How much is that?
For you, they're
$1,500.
well. First, you have to buy the deluxe edition. Amazon actually asks you, "Did you buy the deluxe edition?" Where you push buy now. You didn't buy the deluxe edition.
The important thing about the deluxe edition is that money supports editing of future works, because there's not a whole lot of money sitting around for editing this stuff.
Where is the deluxe edition?
So that is a real donation, and not just getting this box set, but the merit of contributing to the dissemination of the Dharma.
And now we're going to hear from the newly minted president of Naropa.
So I had 2 reasons to speak for a couple of minutes, but actually now there's a third. The first is Naropa has been really blessed to be sponsoring, one of the sponsors of all of these panels, and we are supporting the reception, which is out there. So I hope you will stay and talk to the panelists and enjoy yourselves. The other thing is you will find out there a brochure. Believe it or not, Naropa has never had a scholarship named for the Vidyadhara, which makes no sense really, but in any case, we found that out. And I think it's very important. So this sort of ties to the third thing that I've sort of just realized, that Judy sort of went through her 7-year descent into hell for these books, and now I'm starting mine since I supported her. But one of the things I realized is that to so many people, Naropa, so many people that were my friends within the Shambhala community, Naropa for many people is sort of over there. It's this thing that happened. And Naropa, in fact, next year is celebrating its 40th anniversary. Some of us were there then, some of us much older now are still here. But I realized, especially here, more so than in the other panels, is how much Naropa and Shambhala were basically the product of a multiple birth, with the father being the Vidyadhara. We've had more or less 8 leaders of Naropa University, 4 of whom are in this room, from Marty to Bill McKeever to Judy and myself. We have faculty, at least one faculty I was sitting next to. We have faculty who are current faculty sitting on this panel. No doubt other people in the room. We have Naropa graduates sitting in this room, and I spoke to a young woman today who wants to enroll in a graduate program. So Naropa basically is a manifestation of the Vidyadhara's teaching of his mind, and what I want to encourage is 2 things. One is, if you're inspired to support a younger generation of incredible students, none of whom met the Vidyadhara or had the opportunity that we had, many of whom don't have the economic means to cover the cost of their education. This is a scholarship which is going to go to 3 students. It's going to be merit-based and needs-based, and it's going to allow students from as diverse a group as possible to study at Naropa. But I think more broadly, what I want to encourage people to do is take a look at Naropa for yourselves. Express some curiosity, invite our faculty to come to Halifax to work with you here, figure out reasons to invite yourself to Boulder, to teach, to study, to do something with us there. There was something last summer because of the fires at Shambhala Mountain Center, and Naropa really kind of accidentally became the host for the Scorpion Seal retreat last summer, which I think really crystallized. It was sort of that dot that was put down that reconnected in some really profound way Naropa and Shambhala. And I think that my job is to maintain that connection and to allow that to flourish. So we'd love some support for the scholarship, but more broadly, we'd really like to get back together in a way that for the last many years has kind of frayed a little bit. And I think this is an invitation to figure out a way to reconnect. And so that's the unexpected message, but one that I felt motivated to want to say. So thank you.
So we shall very shortly close and drink the wine that Naropa has bought for us. And thank you very much for that. So the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma has been now given birth and thrust upon the world, and it will be interesting to see what happens as a result of that activity. So I do encourage you to buy the text and support those people who are working on that particular aspect of the multifarious dharmic work that's come out of the Vidyadharas coming to the West. There are many different branches and many different types of work. And one thing that will be important as people try to study this material in generations to come is that they will actually be able to have the context to answer that question that Lodra was posing. What the fuck does this mean? And that's going to require human beings who have a little taste of what the fuck this might mean. So please support that activity, whatever it involves. Go ahead.